Hi, this is Bob. Welcome to another edition of Conversations. This week we're moving into John chapter 2 in the Gospel, and we've already been through a little conversation, hopefully you've had some with your friends, about what John was asserting in chapter 1 about who Jesus was and who he believed he was and what the evidence was. And actually we're getting more into the evidence in this particular chapter, chapter 2. Evidence is a funny thing. When you try to make an assertion or when you make any kind of a statement, sometimes people want to know, why do you say that? How can you insist that that's true? They want some evidence. It's obvious in a court case that the attorneys have to give evidence of a person's crime, otherwise the person is innocent. Evidence can come in any number of different ways. There's a story by Aesop about a sick lion and a fox. And the sick lion pretty much stays in his cave and he expects his subjects, all the other animals, to bring him food or bring him homage, whatever they're doing. But he notices one day that the fox never comes in. And he questioned the fox from inside the cave while the fox was outside. And the fox says, "Well, I see all the tracks of the animals going in, but I don't ever see any tracks coming out. So if it's okay with you, I think I'll just stay where I am." He saw the evidence. The animals weren't coming out. There was a reason for that. John does the same thing now. He begins to compile his evidence to assert by his own testimony why he believes Jesus was creator, was with God, and was the author of life. Stop for a minute here and take a look at John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, about a wedding. So in the wedding, you would have seen that something very uncomfortable happens. It's not a major crisis, but it is a social crisis, and that is they run out of refreshments, in particular wine. So Jesus has the servants draw water into some very, very large pitchers, and they put wine in there, and by the time the wine gets taken to the master of the feast, it is turned to wine. It is very good wine. It's also a very lot of wine. But the fact is, nobody except the servants and the disciples knew how that happened. And John says the disciples, because of this, put their faith in him. But John's not through with some evidence here. He tells us that Jesus now goes to the temple, a whole different social environment. He clears the temple, and some of the people who are there get very upset. Like, what gives you the right to do that? What authority do you have to do such a thing? And Jesus tells them basically, if you would destroy this temple, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. Of course, they're aghast that he would make a stupid statement like that. But it would be later on, after Jesus rose from the dead, that his disciples would remember it, and they would make the connection that that's what he was really referring to. Not the literal temple, but his body. In fact, he did raise himself from the dead after he died. So where's all this evidence leading us? And that's kind of the question that I think we need to answer in our conversations. I think John wants us to ask the question, number one, who is it that controls nature? Who can take ordinary water and in a split moment turn it into wine? It's very interesting later on in Jesus' life when he calms a storm. The disciples are also pretty surprised at that, and after they see him calm the storm with a word, they all turn and look at each other and say, "Who is this?" That was the right question. The next thing I think John wants us to ask in our conversation here is, who is it that controls life and death? Who is it that has the power to come back from the dead? Well, once again, we're led back to what John asserts in chapter 1. He was really somebody more than just another human being. So think about those things as you have your discussions and conversations for the week. Make sure you read those sections and think about it, talk about it. There's more in that chapter, but the fact is those two things are some pretty strong pieces of information, pieces of evidence that we all need to think about in terms of who do we think Jesus is. Stay tuned for next week. We're going to ask, how's your spiritual life? Thanks for listening. Enjoy your conversation this week.